What's up, y'all? Welcome to the video. Today we'll be continuing the Souls-like combat series with more work on our attack systems. In the last video, we left off with our basic AI attacking, where our enemy was able to chase the player, get close enough to be within striking distance, and trigger attack animations. For this video, we'll be getting into creating our damage and health system, as well as some other features that will be needed to make our basic combat feel more complete. The first thing we'll start with today is adding some more member fields to our combat component class, as well as some of the methods that we're going to need here. Looking in the header file, we're going to add some fields for health, some montages for hit reactions and death, as well as a couple of methods to track whether or not an actor is staggered or dying. We're also going to need some methods for generating hit traces, which we're going to put in the form of either a sphere or a capsule, which you'll see why in a bit here. And lastly, we're going to need the methods for handling damage, triggering death, and tracking an active list of damaged actors as attacks are played. Getting into the actual CPP implementation here, the first methods that we're going to implement include the is staggered and is dying methods, which pretty much just return whether or not the hurt montage or death montage is playing. These will be particularly useful when blocking certain logic to be called for these types of combat situations where, for example, an enemy can't attack us when they're currently dying or staggered. Next, looking at our generate hit sphere method, we're going to pass in the location of the trace, the radius of the sphere, an attack stats struct, which I'll show in a moment, and whether or not to show the debug lines of the trace. This first part of the method includes setting up the parameters for the sphere trace and then storing whatever actors it finds in the out hits array. If any actors were found, we'll iterate through each hit, check if the damaged actor is already contained within the damaged actors list, and if it isn't, then it'll add to the list and call the damage handler method. Looking at the generate hit capsule, it is pretty much the same process as the sphere, however this time we're sending in a beginning location and an end location. Aside from that, the logic is pretty much the same as the sphere trace. Now before getting into our damage handler method, here we have our attack stats struct. It is pretty simple for now and only contains a field for the amount of damage to deal, but we can expand upon this later on as we flesh out the combat system more. This struct is placed in the combat structs header file, so it shares a file with our attack struct that we made in the previous video. Getting into our damage handler method, this will pass in the victim of the attack, the hit location, and the attack stats. We're first making sure that the victim getting hit has a combat component for us to interact with, and if it doesn't or the victim is already at 0 health, then we're going to return. Next, we get the victim's anim instance and try to play their hurt montage, which will then make the actor go into their staggering state. And lastly, we call the take damage method with the damage passed through the attack stats. Looking at the take damage method, first we check that the actor isn't already dying, we negate their health based on damage passed in, and if their health goes to or below 0, then we call the die method. Inside the die method, it is pretty straightforward. We're going to get the actor's anim instance, play to death montage, and disable movement. This is pretty much going to cover everything that we're going to need in this video for the combat component, and we're now going to start using these methods we just created to actually implement the combat into gameplay. So the main way we'll be calling these methods is going to be through Animation Notifies. And what Animation Notifies, in short, are these little event triggers that we can place on specific frames in our different animation timelines. So if we want our attacks and damage handling to be frame accurate, just like a Souls-like, these Animation Notifies make that fairly simple. Now, before we get into making some of these, there are two main notify types in Unreal Engine. The first is just a basic Anim Notify, which, when passed by in the animation, gets called, and we can add our own custom functionality there. And second is an Anim Notify state, which is similar to a normal Anim Notify, but it has a begin point and an end point, which allows us to add custom functionality at the begin, end, and any tick in between. These are going to be particularly useful for specific cases where we want some continuous tracking in between two frames of an animation. With that said, we're going to get into making our first Anim Notify state, which we're going to call ans/window. In the header here, we're going to be tracking the begin and end points and the slash and a timer for checking these endpoints within the animation. We're also going to make some public fields, which will allow us to customize the parameters of the tracing, and we're going to override these three functions down here in the notify state for implementing our custom logic. Looking at the CPP, when the notify starts, we're going to get the combat component of the actor playing the animation, as well as the location to generate the trace, which we're going to be getting from a socket that is placed on the owning actor's skeleton. If continuous tracing is off, we're going to generate a hit sphere, but for our use case, we'll likely not need to use this too much. This is mainly only useful for times where you may not want to generate a full swing of traces and just want one sphere check at a given location. Next, we're going to set the slash beginning to be the socket location, and we're going to initialize the timer and time between checks based on the amount of traces that we'd like in our swing. In our notify tick, we're going to manage our timer, and when it's time to generate the next trace, we'll get the same information that we got from the notify begin. but this time we'll set the endpoint, generate a hit capsule with our 2 endpoints, and set new values here. Once the notify ends, again we're going to get the combat component in socket location, set the endpoint, and generate the last hit trace. We'll then clear the list of damaged actors so that when a new attack is played, we can then damage them again. The reason we're tracking our damaged actors this way is to prevent false attacks on the same actor within a single slash. For example, if we have a lot of traces in our slash, we're going to have a lot of traces that may potentially overlap with the victim, but realistically, we only hit that victim once in that one slash, so blocking them from taking more damage until the slash is complete keeps things looking a little bit more accurate in gameplay. Now that'll cover what we're going to need for the slash window, so now we're going to make a couple of normal notifies to handle depth for both the player and the enemy. First, for the enemy, once the notify is triggered, we're going to simply destroy the actor, but we can add more behavior to this at a later time. For the player, it'll be a similar setup, but this time we're just going to open up the level that we're currently in to get a fresh start. This will cover mainly everything that we're going to need in code, but before I move on to tying all of this together, I'm going to add some conditional logic in our chase player task here, so that we prevent our enemies from moving if they are dying, staggered, or currently attacking. Now looking into Unreal, if we go and test what we initially have here, see we have our enemy come and can attack us, but all it's doing right now is triggering the animations. So if we go into our BP enemy here, we're going to go into our combat component and we're going to update this. We're just going to keep it at 100 health. Update the hurt montage here. The action hit. And we'll add the death montage as well. If we go and add that. And we're also going to go and do the same for our hack/character. If you haven't already gone and added a combat component to your character, you might as well go and do that now. And we're not going to add anything in the attack map yet because everything's already handled in the other way. So we don't necessarily need to do that right now, but if you'd like to port everything over to an attack map and call those functions within the hack/character class, then you can go and do that. We're going to also keep this at 100 health, and we're going to have the night hit. Yep, night hit montage and the death montage. And once you've gone and updated your blueprints there, we're now going to go and add our Anim Notifies to the different animation timelines. So firstly, we're going to start with the night, go into night animations, montages. We're going to go and find our combo montage. And what we're going to do is we're going to go on this new notify track right here. We're going to find the first point where the night is going to slash. And that is about right here. Right there. And if you go to add notify state, you should be able to now see your ANS/window. Going to add that. And now we can mess with all of these different parameters. We're first going to go with the socket name, and we're going to call this hit socket. Should fire an editor, don't need that. And I've already gone ahead and actually added this socket to the skeleton. So if you go through there, you can see that there's a socket attached to the sword. It's very simple to do this. If you haven't made a socket before, just go into, say, the right hand, right click, add socket, and then now you have a different socket that you can move around and rotate as you please. But since I already went and made the hit socket, I'm just going to use that. So if we go back into this window, we're going to go and make the radius about 30. Go into the attack stats drop down. I'm going to make each slash do about 50 damage. And keep continuous tracing on, 5 should be good, and we're going to turn on debug mode so that we can see what we're doing here. So now, those should be fine for the parameters. We're now going to go and find the endpoint of the slash, which is about here. Go find the slash, or start with the next slash, which is about here. Make a new state. With the parameters here, hit socket again. And debug mode. And then we're going to go and do the same exact thing for the last one. All right, and that should be good. So now if we go and test that, you can see now we're making some capsule traces along the hit path. And if we go and we damage, we can see they react, still hit us, but they're not doing anything because we haven't set it up for their animation yet. If we go and attack them again, they'll now die. But as you can see here, we haven't handled the actual death and added that notify in the death montage yet. So once you kill them, they can't really do anything else, they're dead, but we haven't handled what happens after they die properly, so the animation just goes back to their idle. So if we go and actually fix that real quick, we can go into assets, go into zombie, animations, montages. If we go into their dying montage, a little bit towards the end here, about there, we can go and add a new notify, and we're going to go AN defeat enemy. If we go and test that again, they're going to die, and then they should be destroyed. Now, what we can do is we can go and we can do the same thing that we did with the knight as for the slash window, but we're going to do it for the zombie attack. So if we go into zombie animations, montages, go into their attack montage, only going to need one slash for this. So find the beginning, just about there, beginning slash window. We make the socket on this. Let's also hit socket. Make their radius about 30. The attack on this one's only going to be about 20 since the enemy should be a little weaker than us. Also turn on debug mode for them, and we'll then go and set the balance for. Perfect. Okay, so now if we go and test that, we should be able to get hit. And we do have our hit reaction. And we can't move or do anything when we're getting hit because we do have root motion enabled on these animations. So if you're in the middle of getting hit or dying, you can't really do anything to move. And we haven't done the death handling yet, so we are also in an idle state as our player. But we can go and do the same thing that we did for the zombie and their death montage or for the knight. So if we go into knight, animations, montages, going to find our death montage right here. We'll do the same thing here. Right click, Anim Notify, defeat player. Let them hit me a couple times, see what happens when we die, and it should reset the level. Very good. And there we go. So now if we go into those different slashes and we turn off the debug lines, it should now look like it should in a Souls-like as far as the basic combat goes. And there you go. Now this should also work for different enemies. So if we only have one in the scene right now, but if you want to go and you want to add multiple characters, that should work fine as well. So there you have it, we now have a more complete version of our basic combat system with damage and health functional, as well as a way to make the tracking of that frame accurate with whichever animation we want to use in our game. In the next video, I'll be covering the UI setup so we can visualize the system that we just got working and get some more feedback to the player. Until then, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.